Okay, so for those of you who are joining us with the recording, welcome to the Autism Understanding Scotland's Masking and Burnout webinar in August 2023. Thank you so much for joining us. As ever, we always want to let people know who are these people and why should we be listening to them. So my name is Marion McLaughlin. I'm the CEO at Autism Understanding Scotland. My background is in education. I'm a qualified teacher. I'm one of the spokespersons for the Scottish Government Different Minds campaign. And if you haven't already checked it out, strongly recommend that you do. Flick and I did a huge amount of work for it, and they animated me, and I'm very cute in 2 dimensions. As well as being late diagnosed autistic, it's just coming up for 6 years since I had that light bulb moment that, yes, I'm autistic and I want to go and investigate that. I'm also the parent of an autistic child. Flick, who are you?
Right. So I am Felicity. Some of you might know me as Flick. I will answer to either. And I am the senior autism practitioner here at AUScot. I too am late diagnosed autistic myself. I was most upset over the summer because it was my 2-year anniversary from when I was diagnosed, and I really wanted to celebrate because the first year I forgot to write down the date and I couldn't remember when it happened. So I looked it up in advance this time. And it fell 2 days after I'd had a tonsillectomy, so there was no cake on the cards for me. So next year is the year I am really celebrating my anniversary.
We
But
need a
I'm
do-over.
yeah,
We'll
yeah,
do
that's
another do-over. Yeah.
I'll be like the queen. Well, not the queen anymore. The king, I am assuming, also has 2 birthdays. I can have my, official anniversary in my but yes, I'm also a parent to 2 autistic children. I am a former English tutor. And back when I did tutoring, I particularly enjoyed kind of tutoring neurodivergent tutees, even though I had no idea at the time that I was also one of them. And I was also one of the co-chairs on the Aberdeenshire Autism Strategy Planning Group, which really excitingly has, now morphed into the implementation team and everything as the new strategy is being rolled out across the Shire.
Very exciting and really good practice having somebody who is autistic co-chairing the group. We want to see that over everywhere, don't we? Okay, so what to expect today? We're going to have a look at what masking is. So what even is it in the first place? Why do autistic people mask? We're going to have a discussion about unmasking because it's not quite as simple as masking is bad, we should unmask. It's much, much more complicated than that. We can have a look at burnout, sort of traditional thinking around burnout, and we're also going to have a look at atypical burnout. And there's been some fantastic work being done on that, thanks to David Graham and Tanya Adkins. So we're going to have a look at that, and we've got links to their work as well, so you can go and check it out. I think it's brilliant coming and listening to an autistic-led organisation, but we need to listen to lots of different autistic people, so we're quite happy to signpost to others there. And how do we actually go and tackle burnout as well? Because burnout is distressingly common, I think, within our community. And it's so often misdiagnosed, it's so often misunderstood. And the typical things that they usually tell people to do if they think that it's depression instead really aren't helpful. So what can we actually do about it? So our aim is to really help to inform, raise knowledge and understanding, but also empower people to do something positive. And you can make your own decisions about what's going to be the best step for you. Flick, would you like to talk to them about masking?
Yeah. So we've got some specific examples of how this might kind of look on the next slide, but a general idea of like what actually is masking, what is autistic masking. So essentially it's kind of hiding or suppressing or camouflaging. A lot of people are kind of describing it as now our authentic autistic self. So it's sort of, making ourselves less autistic for the sake of the people around us, essentially. So it's a bit like kind of this idea of fortress building. It is a survival tool. So it is this idea that if you are masking, you are kind of building something around you to protect you from the outside world, essentially. And the reason that this kind of comes about is because it's a trauma response, is what it is. So yeah, autistic people, we tend, as we go through life, we do tend to experience trauma. And, often that is not even necessarily from big traumatic events and things, although obviously, that can happen as well, but it can be a sort of drip effect over the years, a sort of, gaslighting and things, about sensory experiences and things like that. No, that's not too spicy. That's not scratchy at all. What are you talking about? So generally speaking, when we're supporting autistic people, we find that we tend to have that trauma profile, and we do find that masking is a response to that trauma that we've experienced throughout our lives, from sort of being left out, from being isolated, from being bullied, all of these sorts of things. And it's often not something that we're doing consciously. We don't kind of get up in the morning and think to ourselves, right, I'm going to mask today, I'm going to hide my autistic self, behind this fortress. It's just something that we often do instinctively, and it can start from such a young age as well. It really can. I think both Marion and I have kind of stories from our childhood of when we were masking at a really young age without even realizing that was what we were actually doing, because it isn't something that you decide to do necessarily. And it is also a loss of a sense of identity, because if you're constantly hiding the real you, hiding your real responses to things in the real world, hiding your own kind of natural way of communicating and being and holding yourself, even, your natural way of sitting or something, how do you know who you are? How do you know what your own identity really is then, if you've never allowed yourself to fully explore it, because you've constantly tried to shape yourself to fit into the world around you and the people around you? So there's definitely this kind of loss of a sense of identity that can come along with it as well, isn't there?
Oh, very much so. And I heard Evelyn Welton from Awesome Training recently talking about autistic masking being fortress building. And as soon as she said that, I was like, oh my gosh, it really is, isn't it? It's such a powerful way to think about it. But I think that we can be so vulnerable as autistic people. You can understand why we build these walls around us, and we create these masks to protect that autistic person on the inside. And sometimes we just don't even know that we're doing it. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I remember sort of realizing when I was just 3 years old how different I was to other children. That's terribly young, isn't it?
Very,
Terribly
very
young.
young. Yeah, because I
Yeah,
think we get a lot of
but I'm not.
professionals and the like kind of saying, oh, but they're too young to be masking. And we're like, no, honestly, there is no too young to be masking. It happens a lot younger than a lot of people realize, doesn't it?
Oh, very much so. Well, let's have a look. So, what does masking look like then? So there's lots of different ways that autistic people mask, and this isn't a completely exhaustive list, but it's quite a lot of the things that people will do to mask. So we can take a look at them. Always analyzing your own behavior. So a lot of autistic people, when we're going to go to a social situation, before we go to that social situation, we will be thinking really, really hard about it, right? So who am I going to see? What did we talk about last time we saw them? Oh, they mentioned that their granny was poorly, so I better remember to ask them. And we might be creating this list in our head of topics that we want to cover. Then whenever we get to that social situation, whether it's hanging out with friends or, in the workplace, at school, you'll be analyzing what you're doing the entire time. Is what I'm doing different from the other people around me? Is what I'm doing matching what they're kind of doing? Is what I'm doing okay? Am I being too weird? Am I being too loud? Am I being too quiet? Am I being rude? Am I not swearing enough because my friends are swearing a lot? So maybe I should swear a bit more. Am I swearing too much? Which is usually my one. Am I swearing too much in this situation? Because they're not as much. And making sure that your behavior is matching the others as much as you possibly can. And then afterwards, we will go through the analyzing of what we did. So we've got through that social situation. And then as soon as we get out of that social situation, replaying that situation in our head. So then we're going over it again. Right, I did this and they reacted that way. They had that microfacial expression there. I'm just processing it now. What does that mean? And then going through that entire interaction to check that you were appropriate, to check that you weren't too weird, to check that you weren't too different, to check that you weren't doing anything that would get you ostracized. And that's exhausting. That's absolutely exhausting. And so many autistic people do that. And that is part of our masking and sort of like checking our own behavior consistently all the time. And that can even mean adapting our movements to be less idiosyncratic. I remember a little while ago, a good few years ago, someone I know and care about very much were at the opposite ends of a very, very long street in Aberdeen. And we were walking towards each other to meet in the middle. And one of them said, the one I was meeting said to me, I knew that was you walking down the road from ages back. And I was like, oh, you did, that's nice. And he went, yeah, I recognized the way that you were walking. And I went, you recognized my walking? He was like, yeah, you were waddling down the road. And I would like to say that I was pregnant, but I wasn't. I really wasn't. Oh, but my movements are quite idiosyncratic. And they could recognize that because they are quite distinctive. And because I was on my own, I wasn't thinking anything about it. It was like, nice big empty street. It's all good. The other person's ages away. I'm just going to, oh, yes, apparently I'm identifiable a mile off as being idiosyncratic. So there we go. Sometimes that can be taking on different personas. So that could be the persona of someone that you know in real life who is socially doing well, who is socially respected, who is looked up to, and trying to behave like them in certain situations. But it can also be trying to take on the persona of somebody who is fictional as well, maybe from TV or a book or a movie. I grew up in the 90s, I was a teenager in the 90s, and a lot of the other weird kids really took a shine to Phoebe from Friends because she was quite kooky, she was quirky, she was different, and she was accepted. So maybe I can be like her and then I can be accepted, and there's lots of other socially successful characters that a lot of autistic people have tried to emulate as well. And then we copy how they socialize. So we become a bit like, a sociologist, an anthropologist, sitting there watching what other people do, seeing how they socialize with each other, so then we can try and copy that. Now, I said that I was 3 when I first noticed that I was different from other kids. So what happened was I was at a toddler group and there was a big toy airplane that I wanted to play with. Yes, I wanted to play with this toy airplane. And I was making my way towards it when I saw these 2 boys, Michael and Russell, running from different ends of the hall towards the airplane, and they met in the middle. They met at the airplane together. And what they did completely blew my mind. They just started playing with each other in the airplane. And I remember thinking, how can they do that? What's going on that they can just come up to each other and talk? Why can they do that? I can't do that. What's wrong with them that they can do that? What's going on? I really like that my thought was what's wrong with them rather than what's wrong with me, because a lot of other people maybe would have had a different way of thinking. And the fact is, there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with me. We just all do things differently. And the world really needs and has to value different kinds of brains. But the way that they socialized was completely unnatural to me. And I couldn't recognize myself in it at all. And I thought, if I want to be successful here, if I want to make friends here, I'm going to have to learn to do what they do. So I had to start copying what they were doing at 3 years old. So yes, masking can start very, very, very young. Sometimes it can be different accents too. We were doing a training session earlier today where we were talking about a study that came out in the States blaming Peppa Pig on a rise in autism in the States. What was happening was there was a lot of very young children who were autistic watching Peppa and developing English accents. And as a teacher, I remember a couple of my autistic students having pretty much flawless American accents, even though they'd barely ever left Aberdeen, because they'd watched so much of the Disney Channel or, Disney Junior. And they saw these socially successful characters speaking in a certain way. So then they adapted their accents to those people. But we see it as well with other autistic people whenever they're traveling around Scotland, and to other countries as well, picking up accents so that they're morphing into the people that they're around. And it's one of their ways of saying, I'm not different from you. I'm like you. You don't need to reject me, isn't it? And it's not. And I think sometimes people think that, sorry, like you can, yeah, I think sometimes people think that they're worried that the other person is going to think that they're taking the mick, that they're laughing at them. But really, we do it so subconsciously, don't we?
Absolutely, I know, and a lot of autistic people that I've spoken to get really anxious about that actually when
Yeah.
they're traveling and things, because they do worry that people are going to think they're sort of taking the mick, and a lot of the time it's absolutely not conscious and they don't even realize they're doing it half the time. I'm the opposite kind of autistic person. I am rubbish at accents. I try to emulate any accent and it just sounds utterly garbled. But yeah, it is really, really common, I think.
Our next staff meeting is going to involve you trying different accents if you're comfortable doing that. But if you're not, that's totally fine. You can decide. It's entirely up to you, and we support whichever decision.
The only people who get to hear my accents normally are my kids when I'm reading them books and I give it a go. Normally, if I'm reading something like Lord of the Rings, and I'll just try to copy the film actors and the like. So they're too young to really know any better, and they don't laugh at me, so it's fine. But yes, so yeah, the accent thing can definitely be part of masking, but also pretending to be interested in things that you're not, can definitely be a big part of masking as well, because if everyone around you is really interested in, you know, football or the Spice Girls, I'm using an example from when we were younger, not very culturally relevant these days, or something like that, because you know, I certainly had that when I was at school. Spice Girls were a big thing, and so a lot of the girls in the class that I was in, they watched like all the music videos and everything. They knew all the words, they knew all the dances, and they wanted to form like a band, you know, a version of the Spice Girls and everything. And to sort of be a part of it, I joined in with them and had no idea, because I didn't know any of the songs at that point. I mean, I then went and studied them, of course, and yeah, became very familiar with all the songs, and I could probably still sing some of them now. I won't subject you to that, but yeah, it wasn't particularly because naturally I was like, oh wow, what's that music, I love that, you know, I need to go and listen to it all. It was very much to fit in. It was very much because if I hadn't, I was in a tiny school. There were literally only 3 girls in my year group. So yeah, if I wasn't into the same things as them, then I wasn't basically gonna get socialized with. So yeah, I was into the Spice Girls, you know, and I look back and I think, did I ever like their music? I don't know. It's so hard to tell now, because I listened to it so for so long and got to know it, and it's so familiar. But yeah, I'm not sure that I ever really felt that kind of amazed by their music, but pretending to be into the same things as your peers and the people around you can be a big part of masking. Absolutely. Hiding stims, definitely. I mean, this is, yeah, my kind of first memory I have where I sort of think, yes, that was me masking, is back when I was at Rainbows, when I was little. So whatever kind of age that would have been, I think I was around kind of 4 years old or something. And all the other kids were crowded around the leader who was explaining something that we were going to be doing, and I was just stood ever so slightly off to the back of everybody else, and I was clearly trying to regulate myself, because I was sort of swinging my hands out in front of me, touching them together, and then behind me and touching them and swinging them out and then behind me, and just kind of stood swaying slightly, doing that. Wasn't really aware that I was even doing it. And then one of the older kids who was in helping out, one of the brownies that was helping out with the rainbow group I was in, sort of looked to me and said, what are you doing? That's really weird. And I just felt such shame, just felt so ashamed that I was doing something weird and I hadn't even been aware that I was doing anything at all, because it was helping me to keep focused. It was helping me to regulate. It was doing its job, actually, Instinctively, I'd been totally meeting my needs. But when I had it pointed out to me that that wasn't, quote unquote normal, suddenly I stopped. And from that point on, I really paid a lot more attention to what my body was doing. And I made an effort to suppress anything that seemed a bit weird or quirky or out there that might kind of get me sort of looked at or get that attention, that negative attention. To the point where when I did realize that I was autistic, I was convinced for a while that I didn't stim. I was like, no, I don't do that, actually. That's not an autistic thing that I do. And then gradually I realized that I learned to really hide and suppress my stims. And I would stim in ways like, with my toes inside my shoes, I would sort of bunch them up and then release them and bunch them up and then release them, because nobody could see that. Or I'd have more socially acceptable ones, like fiddling with jewelry, because that's something a lot of people do, or kind of clicking a pen, because lots of people sort of do that kind of thing. So yeah, I'd been hiding these stims for so long, to the point where I was hiding them from myself, and I didn't even realize that I was actually actively doing that. So yeah, that can be a massive part as well, as can hiding special interests. Because if we're pretending to be interested in things that other people are, then the obvious kind of flip side of that is hiding things that we're actually interested in, that we genuinely do like, because maybe it's not considered age appropriate, or maybe it's not considered gender appropriate, or maybe it's just seen as being a bit weird or quirky or whatever. And so yeah, well, we can't have people knowing that I am an 18-year-old who still collects cuddly toys, or I can't have people knowing that I'm really into this geeky thing, like big Lord of the Rings fan. And I did actually read it, I think quite openly in school, but there were certain books where I was a bit more like, yeah, no, I'd just maybe not show the cover here, actually, because I'm not sure how everybody else is going to take that. So hiding those special interests because you're worried how other people will react to them can be a big part of masking as well, as can hiding your abilities too. Because as we know, being autistic doesn't just come with all these challenges and struggles and things. Not to diminish our challenges and struggles, because obviously this entire webinar is about the really bad outcome when we have been kind of unsupported, and struggling because of that for a prolonged period. But being autistic can also come with amazing strengths as well. We can have really good pattern recognition. We could maybe have really quirky kind of senses of humor. We can have excellent memories, all these kind of things. But again, some of these things can make us stand out. And when you're trying not to be different, not to be noticed, that's maybe not something that you want. So you can hide the fact that actually you're maybe really good at certain things as well. Because again, you just want to kind of fly under the radar, not call attention to yourself. And sometimes people, as well, if you are quite good at something, you might be accused of being up yourself, being kind of stuck up, or kind of being self-aggrandizing or something. So, that's another tightrope to walk. So it can be easier to just hide it, can't it?
I got sure at times because when I was in primary school, I could spell. So spelling came very, very easily to me. And in primary school, I earned the nickname Dimple Dictionary for being really good at spelling, which I look back on fondly now, to be honest. But in secondary school, that kind of memory wasn't seen as cool. So there'd be times, I might have feigned forgetting something when I actually did know fine well, but I knew that it was more socially acceptable in their eyes, and then non-autistic way of being, to not have that kind of memory, which I feel kind of sad that I did that. Not that I have that kind of memory anymore. Pregnancy, menopause kind of didn't help me retain that. But it's not a bad thing to have that. And it's actually okay to toot our own horns and say, yeah, I'm really good at that.
Yeah. Especially, I think especially when you maybe have got that sort of low self-esteem from various sort of experiences throughout their life, then kind of acknowledging, no, I'm good at this is a skill I have, then that should be celebrated, that should be encouraged, really, shouldn't it?
I did like that in the Barbie movie. There's a bit where some of the Barbies are receiving awards, and they're like, "Yes, I deserve this. I worked really hard for that." And I was like, "How affirming! Yeah, good for them."
Brilliant, love it. I still need to see that though. I was having a service user chatting about it the other day as well, so it just made me really want to go and see it all the more. But anyway, not protecting boundaries, and doing people pleasing, this can be a big one as well, because you know, we are often very overly accommodating to the people around us, and I mean that is what masking kind of is all about in the first place. But that really sort of, you know, no, it's fine, I'll do it, don't worry about it, or yeah, around and visit, or whatever, or you know, oh, I don't really want to give them a hug, but oh, they're going to be offended if I don't, so I'll just do it, even though actually, you know, that's sort of making me physically uncomfortable, and all of these kind of things that we often do to make other people feel better, at the expense of our own mental health. Yeah, that's masking as well, and that can be so hard. It really can, especially if, you know, if you've been kind of socialized as somebody who's assigned female at birth as well. I think we're often kind of told to, well, be a good girl, be courteous, think about other people, and it can be really difficult then to go against that messaging that you've had for kind of years and years and years. But I think all autistic people, you know, we're kind of at risk of that, not protecting our boundaries, you know, having other people sort of trampling over those boundaries. It is a common one, isn't it?
It is very hard, and I think it takes a lot of work to undo that. And I think, you know, we're going to talk about how we can undo some of that just coming up. Dressing to fit in with others, even if it makes you uncomfortable, I think is another one. I mean, I remember again, sort of as a teenager, wearing clothes that I didn't particularly feel comfortable in because I would stand out less in them. And then it's like, well, if I do that, then maybe I'm going to be less of a target. They won't think that I'm quite so weird. Maybe they'll think that I fit in a little bit more. And it was often to the detriment of my own sensory experience as well, which very, very much ties into that next, denying sensory experiences. So many of us who are autistic are told that we're too sensitive. And I hate that phrase. I genuinely do. We're not too sensitive. We are exactly as sensitive as we are, right? A lot of autistic people are incredibly resilient already, but there is no amount of desensitization to sensory input that will actually work for it, right? Small amounts of it don't work, large amounts of it don't work. The thing that helps us deal with sensory experiences is helping us to regulate our emotions. But even then, there's some sensory experiences that are just never going to work for us. And I think we're planning on doing a webinar looking at sensory experiences coming up quite soon. But if you've said things like, that's too scratchy, and then you've repeatedly had people say, no, it's not, no, it's not, no, it's not, then at some point, a lot of autistic people think, oh, well, I must be wrong then. Maybe it's not too scratchy. And then you start denying those sensory experiences, even to yourself. So you stop saying these things about your physical discomfort so that you're not being a nuisance to other people. And then you just even deny them to yourself. It's like, no, it's not that they've all said that this isn't too scratchy. So I'm making it up. So it must not be true. But actually, your sensory experiences might be different to those around you, but that doesn't make them any less real. And it's the same with denying emotional responses as well, because sometimes our emotional responses might not match what some other people expect. And a lot of autistic people have emotional responses to something that other people might think of as logical, and we might have logical responses to something that other people think of as emotional. But sometimes we have both of those responses to something, and that's actually okay. And maybe we just show them at different times. But again, we might be emotionally uncomfortable by something and then choose not to say that we're emotionally uncomfortable. And I think some of that goes around with that not protecting boundaries, the people pleasing. Many of us come from families where the expectation would be, if there's a family get together, you have to go around and hug and kiss everybody and say hi to them all. And then at the end of the social gathering, you have to go around and hug and kiss everybody and say goodbye to them all again. Now, emotionally, that can be quite draining. But sometimes we deny those responses for other people's comforts, and we don't put in those boundaries so that we can seem like a good kid. a nice person. And there's lots of ways to be good, and there's lots of ways to be nice. And we can do them all while protecting our boundaries. We can choose which ones we want to share. But when we're masking, we don't do that. We do what we anticipate the other people around us want us to be doing. Now, we will say that some of these examples did come from Izzy at self-care, Autistic self-care on Instagram, but it's not an exhaustive list, is it? I mean, I'm sure I haven't checked the chat because there's over 99 messages on it. So that's brilliant. I'm very, very happy about it. But I'm sure that some of you are sharing some of the other sort of masking that you do. But what can we do about it? Well, masking plus people pleasing. Sorry, click. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, this is and I think that from what I have sort of glanced at in the chat, I think that people are very much relating to the people pleasing. So you might want to know about fawning. So masking and people pleasing kind of combined is part of that fourth crisis point. So fawning, so you know, crisis points, those neurological events that take place in our brains when we get to the point where we just can't take anymore. Yeah, you know, sometimes we have a meltdown, sometimes we have a shutdown, things like this, but we also fawn, because actually if you make yourself just super ingratiating towards the people around you, then surely they won't put any demands on you, surely they won't, you know, do anything bad towards you, surely you'll be kept safe by that, right? So as a protective measure, yeah, it's like, well, no, but honestly, I'm so great and lovely and I'll do anything you want, and please don't be mean. So yeah, again, it's not intentional and planned out that way, but yeah, absolutely, fawning is very, very common, and I think that a lot of you will probably be relating to that, whether you're watching this on the recording or watching us just now.
Yeah. Oh, I very much did that. And I sometimes catch myself trying to do it. And I think because it just became such a big habit for such a long time. And I have to remind myself that it's okay not to be everything for everybody. And that it's okay to take time for myself, especially whenever I'm burnt out. That it's okay to not do these things. But it's very difficult when that's been second nature since you were 3 years old, younger. That's very, very hard to stop doing, isn't it?
It really is, yeah.
Now, it's really not as simple as masking is bad, so we have to drop the mask, right? Clearly, masking is not good for us. We can see that. But also, clearly, there are reasons why we mask in the first place, to protect ourselves so that we don't get rejected and so that we don't get hurt. But there does come a point when we have to think, do I want to mask? Do I not want to mask? How do I unmask? So let's unpack some of that. So here's some of the pros and some of the cons of masking, right? So you might appear to fit in more. So if I'm wearing the same clothes as you, and I'm talking about, well, in my case, it wasn't the Spice Girls. It was Take That for some of the girls in my year. I really wanted to listen to Metallica and Nirvana, and I did. But I still ended up having to learn the names of everybody and Take That, and I still don't really. Excellent musicians, I'm sure, just not for me. So you might appear to fit in more, but you might come across as a little bit insincere with some of the things that you're saying. So it might not necessarily come off as being as genuine because you're not necessarily feeling it to the same extent. And I think a lot of us work really, really hard. A lot of us work very, very hard to try and make sure that we're not presenting too differently, but some people can still sort of pick up on it whenever we're not as 100% sincere as they are. You might avoid some unwanted attention, which can be very good to avoid unwanted attention. But you might also be less comfortable physically or emotionally because you're not going for that. So that can be really, really difficult as well, can't it, Flick? Yeah. So do you want to take a couple more? I'm happy to share the slide. Can we share?
Yeah, go
Unless
for
you
it.
need a break.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Let's share.
Sorry, I was glancing at the chat and stuff. So yeah, we're on questions, are we? So
I've just landed you in it. I'm like, yeah,
No.
you don't have to answer questions about autism.
Yes. So you know, I mean, and we choose to answer questions about autism for our job. We choose to be autistic advocates who are out there, you know. But the thing is, actually, not everybody wants to be answering. And to be honest, even in our personal lives, there are times when, yeah, we kind of get to the end of the day and it's like, oh, actually, I'm done for the day. Can I not have to answer a million questions about stimming and things, you know, right now? And when you're
Mm.
masking and nobody realizes that you're autistic, you don't tend to get those questions. So, you know, yeah, that's a pro. And you don't have to deal with that stigma as well around being autistic. You know, because there is still stigma. And a lot of the time, that obviously the reason that we're masking in the first place is because when we're not masking, there's a risk. You know, there's a risk involved that people aren't going to like us for who we are, that we're going to be isolated and things. So yeah, dealing with that stigma, it can be really difficult. And you do have to do that less if you're masking, which, you know, probably leads on to the next one, doesn't it?
Yeah, you might feel just a little bit safer, you know, if you've built up that fortress, if you built up that mask, that wall, you're going to feel a little bit more safe hiding behind there rather than showing off the real you, because there's a huge amount of vulnerability there. We get it. We're autistic ourselves. We completely understand. Um, but just because you feel safer, sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that you always are safer. But but it can be a comfort for some people whenever they're going out, like they're putting their war paint on, really. And you may sometimes get treated a little bit better by others because they don't know that you're autistic. Um, some of the things that we hear as openly autistic people can be quite difficult at times. And some of the responses that you have whenever you disclose that you're autistic can be quite hard at times as well. And that's maybe another webinar that we need to do at some point again soon, just how to disclose that you're autistic too. Um, did you have somebody telling you recently that they were told that they were too attractive to be autistic?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, so you don't have to deal with things like that if you are masking, and people may not treat you as less than. Whereas sometimes whenever you tell someone that you're autistic, they might start talking really slowly and simplify their language in a way that they wouldn't have done otherwise, in a way that you don't necessarily need. So it's really hard sometimes sort of being openly autistic with that. And if you're masking, then sometimes you don't have to deal with that. But I mean, we've said you might come off as insincere and be less physically comfortable, but as Flip said earlier, it can be really difficult to know who the real you is. I remember the first time I was living alone. And I had been living with family, I'd been living with flatmates, I'd been living with a partner, and then all of a sudden I was living alone. And I had to sit down and really, really think, who am I? Like, what do I want to do? And there were all these things that I would usually do. It was a Friday night. I was the first time I was in by myself. Like, it's a Friday night. Do I want to watch Frasier? Let me have a think about it, because that's just always what I've done because of the other people around me. Do I actually do want to do that? Do I want to listen to this music, or do I want to listen to that music? One is it? And I really have to sit and figure out, who the hell am I when there's nobody else around for me to mirror off of? And that was a really, 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 really hard thing to try and figure out. And that sense of identity, I think, at that point was completely fractured. And I would say it took a good few years to try and figure out who I am and what it is I'm all about. What are my values? Who do I actually want to vote for? Do I actually believe in this religion? Do I believe in that? Do I believe in any? Do I want to go here? Is this a charity I want to support? You know, all of these different things. All the most minuscule decisions that you wouldn't necessarily think can very often be influenced by the people that you're mirroring around. And whenever you have that opportunity, or whenever you're forced into that situation where you have to kind of figure these things out, that can be very, very difficult. So if anybody is going through that just now, if anybody has been through that, nothing but empathy, honestly, because genuinely been there and I know how hard that can be. But you can get through it. It just takes time. And support from people who you don't need to mask around. But Flick, do you want to take, because it's so sad missing out on opportunities to explore special interests.
I think that, yeah, it's that sort of thing. Like if you're maybe a parent, and you know there's a Lego exhibition on or something, are you going to feel confident going along for yourself if Lego's your special interest? You know, if actually you might run into other parents from the school who have taken their kids along, you know, or are you gonna, if you're masking, maybe not, you know, maybe you'll go, well, I really want to go, but I'm gonna feel embarrassed if I run into somebody I know and I don't have my kid with me, or you know, I'm clearly geeking out over a set or something. And I know that you know, when I left home to go to university, I packed up my room and everything. And I got to all my cuddly toys, and I had a massive collection of soft toys. And I thought to myself, right, well, if I'm going off to uni, I'm going and living independently, you know, I'm an adult now. It's not really age appropriate to have this many anymore, is it? And I got rid of a load of them. And honestly, I'm so sad now that I did. But the good thing about knowing I'm autistic, embracing my autistic, you know, identity, and embracing my special interests and sensory needs is that I am now building back up a lovely collection of soft toys, and I do not feel in any way silly about it or embarrassed at all, which is great. But when I was still masking heavily, wouldn't have let myself, you know. So yeah, you can absolutely miss out on things that bring you joy, and our special interests actually really help our mental health. So again, it's having that knock-on effect with your mental health as well. But also, if you're masking constantly and people don't realize that you are autistic and you have autistic needs, then those needs are not going to be taken seriously a lot of the time. You know, if you're trying to explain to people, look, I really need this sensory support in place, but they're going, but you do absolutely fine without it, then you know they're going to be reluctant to actually implement that. And trying to explain to people, well, look, I know I look like I'm coping. I know that I look like I'm fine in the sensory environment, but it's all just for your benefit. You know, that's something that you're not going to want to do if you're masking. So yeah, it means that you can end up missing out basically, you know, on things like reasonable adjustments and the like, if you're kind of still masking the fact that you're autistic. And it's just more difficult in general to ask for help, because again, if you're not able to explain to people why you need that help in the first place, if they've never seen why you might benefit from that help, then it's going to be really difficult for you to go ahead and do it. And especially if you're kind of in the middle of fawning and things, then yeah, asking for help is the last thing you're going to feel comfortable doing at all, because it sort of goes completely contrary to the fawning response. And all of this combined means that you're probably going to end up having more crisis points, you know, more meltdowns, more shutdowns, more elopement. You're going to have more exhaustion, going to be really tired from having to think about all this stuff constantly, that hypervigilance, you know, that constantly kind of denying your sensory needs. And it does mean as well that you're much more likely to hit burnout, which is, you know, what we'll be moving on soonish to have a look at as well. It's very much linked to poor mental health, the constant masking, isn't it?
Very much so. I mean, I think that we often see that with a lot of autistic people, they might be in education or in work during the day, and they're masking so heavily. And then as soon as they come home, that's it. All those emotions that they've been holding in, desperately holding in, just go flying everywhere. I mean, we talk about the Coke bottle effect, where it's like you've been shaken up and then you take the lid off. Well, for a lot of us, we're shaken up, and then before you take the lid off too far, you dump a ton of Mentos in, and then it just goes absolutely everywhere. You know, so it's not just like the Coke bottle effect; it's the Coke bottle volcano effect. Really, I think for an awful lot of us. And I know I used to go home and shut down, not be able to talk to anyone, just have to go and like lie in the dark room for quite a long time afterwards. Yeah. But it's not as simple again as unmasking too. So let's have a look at some of the pros and cons of unmasking. So one of the pros of unmasking is that you can learn how to accept yourself. it's part of autistic acceptance. It's for a lot of us. It's finding ways that we can unmask, and we're going to have a look at that next. It's finding ways that we can unmask, and that's part of accepting who we are, really. It's okay for me to stim and flap. Genuinely is. You know, it's okay for me not to give eye contact. It's okay for me to dress in a way that's comfortable for me. I'm learning that, that real self-acceptance. I'm learning how to love yourself as somebody who's autistic. That's one of the most powerful things that you can possibly do. I think I spent a lot of my teens and 20s and 30s not really comfortable with with myself in an awful lot of ways. But one of the things I love about finding out that I'm autistic in my very late 30s is that I've been able to spend my 40s actually getting really comfy with me. And I can now say that, at least for most of the time, I kind of like me. I'm not that. And sometimes I think I'm pretty damn awesome. And there are days, when I can really truly believe that, and there are days when that's a little bit harder. But I can do that now in a way that I was never able to do whenever I was younger, and that's amazing. And that's because I've been able to do some unmasking. And it's also easier to ask for reasonable adjustments. Sorry, Flip. Yeah.
No, no.
Yeah, and it's more obvious why you're going to benefit from them. So if people can see that you're struggling with your executive functioning, if they can see that you're struggling with the uniform, if they can see that you're struggling with the sensory environment, then it's a lot easier for people to sort of see why you need that adjustment and feel good about putting it into place. They're not going to necessarily think that you're looking for special treatment. They shouldn't be doing that anyway. But if we unmask a little bit around some people, then it's easier for them to do that. And I hasten to add again, we shouldn't have to do that. You don't have to do that. They should be taking it seriously. And there are ways to sort of redress things if you've not got your reasonable adjustments met. But yeah, feeling more authentic and letting people know the real you is so powerful as well, isn't it? Like,
yeah, it really is. I think that when you've spent a long time kind of with that mask firmly in place, then actually kind of letting people know the real you, it can make you feel vulnerable, but to then have that acceptance is just amazing. It really is. It's absolutely enormous. So yeah, kind of knowing that people accept you for who you genuinely are and not just for what you are when you're masking is really, really good. And it's such kind of amazing validation. There's also the fact that you can then publicly stim. If you're not masking anymore, then you're not hiding those stims in public. And I have gone from very much suppressing all those stims, when I'm in public, doing the hidden, in the shoes and the subtle kind of stims and things, to now I will walk down the street in the village near where we live when I'm going to collect my kids from school, and I will flat walking along if I need to. I will have on sort of sensory supports today, because we've been doing a lot of training and stuff. I've got a zippy bracelet as well, so I had kept that on when I went and did the school run earlier, things like that. And that's really lovely, actually, just being able to let yourself kind of naturally move how you need to when you're out and about without getting really worried about it. And all of that means
we do have to recognize, though, that we do have a certain amount of privilege in doing that in Scotland, don't we?
Oh yeah, and obviously that's on that con section there, is that
we'll have a look there. Just for anybody who worked with part of it, we do recognize that that's not always the case for everybody, and in just a moment we're going to have a look at that as a con, just to reassure that we're not blinded to the fact that that's not an option for everyone.
No,
so it's like as you were.
And the thing is, if you're unmasking, it is going to be less exhausting for you, and you're less likely to hit autistic burnout as well, because you're kind of regulating as you go through the day much more effectively. And you're not kind of doing all of that kind of hiding and letting things out when you get home, which is much better for our mental health. But yes, having said all of this, like we keep saying, it's not as simple as unmasking, all good, no downside. So there are cons as well, aren't there?
I mean, we've sort of mentioned stigma already, but I mean, some of the things that I've had people sort of say to me, so here's just a couple of choice examples You don't look autistic. You can't possibly be autistic because of X, Y, or Z, because I'm a parent, because I'm married, because I have a job, because I own a house. You can't possibly be autistic because of loads of other different reasons. I still think that the too attractive one is just going to make me giggle forever more. I've also had people tell me that they understand that I'm going to have difficulty understanding that meetings happen on different days and other kind of things, which can be really, really difficult. And trying to overcome the stigma and discrimination that other people hold is a very hard aspect of being openly autistic. And again, we would say that if and when you do choose to unmask, you don't have to unmask everything and all at the same time. We'll have a look at that just next. But stigma is a real concern for an awful lot of us, and it should rightly be. There's a lot of work that's going on to change that in Scotland, more so in Scotland, I think, than in a lot of other areas, but there's still a big significant work there. People might be confused that you appear to have changed. So if all of a sudden you're flapping and avoiding eye contact and wearing massively different clothes and talking about Lego when you hadn't mentioned it at all for the last 20 years, yeah, you can see why some people might be a little bit confused that you are outwardly a little bit different, but you're still the same person on the side. On the inside, you've still got the same sense of humor. You've still got, that same inner person. So you're still the same you, and they might just need a little bit of time to get to know that authentic you. And I've tended to find that those people that I'm closest to are really happy whenever they're seeing me on this, because then they get to know the real me too. And I think it is a real privilege if you're around somebody who is choosing to unmask around you, because it means that they're trusting you. It means that they're allowing you into this very sacred space of theirs, and letting you see their authentic self. That's a huge amount of trust. So if someone is unmasking around you, recognize that and really validate them. Let them know how brilliant they are, as long as they're happy with praise. But it might still be a little bit confusing, and it can be confusing to you as well as an autistic person unmasking as well. I think I've kind of covered the who are you whenever we were talking earlier, but I mean, it is a con, but I also found in the long run it's a pro, because it actually made me really, really consider who I am and what I'm all about. And it means that these days I'm really quite secure in that, in a way that I never had been before. And I think there's a lot of people out there who maybe haven't done that level of introspection that a lot of autistic people unmasking go through, and they've missed out on some of that. I know some people who will sort of say that they think something, but whenever you probe into why do you think it, they haven't actually thought it through as logically, as clearly, as rationally as a lot of autistic people who have gone through that unmasking process might have done. So I think it's a short-term con, but a long-term pro. So again, it's not clear cut, is it, Fleck? It's just not clear cut. And that last one there we kind of touched on. Unmasking can make you more vulnerable, particularly if you're traveling to different countries. There are some countries where the amount of stigma and discrimination against autistic people is significantly higher than we have in Scotland, and it's already pretty damn high in Scotland. Like, let's not mince words about that. That's fair to say. There are some places that are doing great, good practice, but it's not across the board yet. But some countries still hold some very difficult, very outdated ideas about autism. So if you are traveling somewhere, it's well worth finding out what is accepted thinking about autism in this country, in this part of the world, so that I'm aware of that. And particularly if you're part of an ethnic minority community as well. So if you're part of an ethnic minority community, if you're Black, Indigenous, if you're a person of color, if you're a racialized person, then even more so. And we know that people who are autistic and also face racism have that double, that intersectional experience. They're going to experience even more stigma, even more discrimination. Then whenever you add in, the discrimination against your religion, discrimination against your gender as well, then that can be really compounded. So it's layer upon layer upon layer of stigma that you're facing there. That's a lot to take on. And as Flick said earlier, we don't all have to be openly autistic all the time. We don't all have to be ambassadors for our community all the time. It's okay if we're not doing that, isn't it? But I'm very conscious of the time because we've spent a long time talking about this already. Shall we have a look at what to do about unmasking?
Absolutely. So
So we
yeah,
have some time for a chat at the end. Yeah.
yes. I know, yeah. Want plenty of time for questions. So, how
Yeah.
and where to unmask? Because I know that, yeah, once you get through to that point, you're kind of like, okay, but where do I even start? How do I go about doing this? You know? Well, first of all, there's no rush. Okay, you don't have to get up tomorrow and suddenly go, right, that's it. I'm unmasking right now. You can take your time with it. You really can, and it's not something you have to do all in one go. You can do it piece by piece as well. You can do little bits of unmasking. So first of all, consider what you want to unmask. What are you sort of looking to unmask to start with? Are you looking to wear clothes that you feel a little bit more comfortable in? Are you looking to be able to explore your special interests a bit more, out in front of other people? Are you looking to allow yourself to do a bit more stimming? Have a little think through, okay, so what are the things that I really want to actually explore first? And then the first step can just be unmasking when you're alone, which sounds silly because some people will probably be thinking, but surely when you're alone, you're not masking. But yeah, we often mask even when we're alone. Even when I was by myself, I was suppressing those stims, for nobody else's benefit at that point, but it's a habit. You do it when you're around other people, and then you continue doing it when you're alone. And again, you're often not even consciously aware of the fact that you were doing this. So the first starting point can be doing it when you're in your own bedroom at home, when you're in the bathroom with the door locked, when you're sitting in the car, waiting for someone. So choose a safe space. So yeah, you're sort of thinking about who is safe to unmask around and where is safe to unmask initially. So yeah, that might just be around yourself, that might be around a trusted partner, might be around your kids. That was actually kind of how I sort of started, I think, as well. Might be around a friend or parents or someone. And where is it safe to unmask? Are you just going to stick to inside your own home to start with, or is it a group that you go to that actually seems really very accepting, and you think that people there would be fine? So have a little think about that first of all. And then also sort of talking about what is happening and why, because the people around you might well be a bit confused. So if you can explain it to them, and hopefully this webinar will help to give you some of the language to actually be able to kind of explain that, then that can make it a bit easier for people to understand what's going on. And then also just take some time afterwards, because it can be big, sometimes you don't realize how big it's going to be until after the fact. So making sure that just in case you need it, you maybe got a bit of downtime sort of factored in, you maybe got a bit of self-care planned. And at the end of this, we'll have a little look at what that might mean as well in terms of self-care, just to take some time afterwards as well. Does that all sound fair enough?
Definitely. All right. So what is autistic burnout? And here we've got some sort of our traditional thinking around autistic burnout. And because if we don't unmask at some points where it is safe for us to do so and we're comfortable to do so, autistic burnout is going to happen. Autistic burnout is a long-term crisis point. And it can mean that you're absolutely exhausted. And we're going to have a look at some of the causes to autistic burnout and some of the barriers to getting some support coming up. So but yeah, real long-term crisis point, and you can be absolutely exhausted. So if you're finding yourself sleeping for like 12 hours plus, more than you would usually do, then it's fair to be considering burnout. It could be some of the other things as well. Don't rule out other stuff, but consider burnout. And in many cases, when you're burnt out, and I know that it's certainly for me 6 years ago, whenever I last hit a massive autistic burnout spell, I completely lost my ability to mask, which was very, very difficult because I'd been masking for a long time. And then I had to deal with all the unmasking stuff in a way that I wasn't prepared to, and a way that I wasn't ready to do. But it happened, and I just had to deal with it. So yeah, not very easy. It can be very, very difficult. And especially if you've always done things like keeping eye contact, if you've always been able to wear certain clothes and then suddenly you can't, that can be quite distressing. And then that can add to your stress and anxiety, and then that can make the burnout worse. Some autistic people experience situational mutism a little bit more whenever they're going through autistic burnout. So situational mutism is uh, where you maybe have a lot of words in your head and you just can't get them out. Sometimes it gets referred to as selective mutism, but as somebody who experiences situational mutism fairly regularly, there is nothing selective about it. I don't select when I'm being mute and when I'm not. Mutism happens for me fairly regularly anyway, even when I'm not in burnout. But when I am burnt out, it happens much more regularly. And again, I think situational mutism is a whole webinar by itself, isn't it? We might appear to be more sensitive to sensory input, or more responsive to sensory input. So it might be harder for us to tolerate the noise of our loved ones eating. It might be harder for us to be in the classroom with that flickering light. So it might be, it could be hard to do these things anyway, but become even more so. An increased difficulty with executive functioning. So that's the seeing that a task needs done, knowing all the steps to go ahead and do to complete the task, and then actually going ahead and completing the task, and then finishing whenever the task is done. And if you're burnt out, it is so much harder to do the thing. We wrote a piece on our social media about it last weekend. If you haven't already seen it, do go and check it out, because it's got some good pointers on what you can do to help you to do the thing. But if you're burnt out, oh my goodness, it is so much harder, isn't it, Flick?
It really is, yeah. And it can be harder to do anything because that loss of skills that can happen can be really across the board, there's no kind of one skill we could point out here because it'll be really individual, but it might be like, yeah, executive functioning kind of based. So it might be that suddenly you're just not really able to cook anymore, sort of following those steps and remembering to get the food out before it burns and the smoke filling the kitchen, and maybe that's gone, or maybe it is related to communication, along the lines of situational mutism. It might be that suddenly you're reaching for words when you're in the middle of a sentence and they're just not there, when normally you find it really easy, and and suddenly, oh no, what's that word?
Oh, the words go for me all the time. Yeah, like earlier I was like, what's the other word for situational mutism? And it took me a minute to get selective, to be honest. But
Yeah.
handwriting seems to be another one with the loss of skills that I hear quite a lot, that handwriting and fine motor skills can become harder.
Yes. And that can be really frustrating if, a special interest is maybe like art based or something, and then people are
Calligraphy.
maybe struggling with that suddenly. So yeah, sometimes it can kind of be quite pervasive. The good news is that those skills will come back when you come out of burnout, just to reassure anybody who's currently kind of lost skills and things. But yeah, that can be really distressing, especially if you don't know why it's happening and just suddenly, oh, I can't do the thing and I don't know why. And going hand in hand with that, you then have increased anxiety as well. And as autistic people, we tend to have higher levels of anxiety anyway, and we're more likely to experience sort of medically diagnosable anxiety. So increased anxiety, not much fun really, but yeah, it just means that everything can really start to get very, very scary. The world can feel like such a scary place actually, and you can find yourself even more than usual awake at 3 o'clock in the morning just panicking about something you have to do the next day and things, and yeah, just that anxiety, just never managing to ever get it back down again. So really, really unpleasant as well, as is suicidal thoughts. And yeah, absolutely, that is something that can come along with burnout. And in some ways, again, I'm hoping that that's almost reassuring for anybody who's listening, and that's something they have been experiencing, because again, That doesn't mean that this is forever. Absolutely not. And we're going to be looking at great techniques for dealing with burnout, just to really reassure you. But absolutely, you know, if you're supporting someone and you're seeing this, that, you know, that you think that they're maybe having suicidal thoughts, then really do consider burnout as a possibility. You
And
might
don't
also
just put
have,
up with it as well. So I was going to say, you know,
yes,
things like anxiety and depression, suicidal ideation. A lot of people think, well, that's just general autistic experience. It's really not. Okay, it's
no,
absolutely not. So you don't have to put up with it. Do go and see somebody if that is what you're experiencing.
yeah.
Again, just in case somebody doesn't get to the end of the webinar, we really want to put that in. Don't have to put up with it. Go and see somebody if that's the case. Sort of like, yeah.
No, yeah, absolutely. And if you are being told by, you know, your GP or somebody, no, that's just part of being autistic, then you can ask for a second opinion, because it's not, honestly. You shouldn't be having to go through this sort of stuff just because you're autistic. You might also find that you've got a reduced interest in socializing as well. And, you know, as autistic people, we often socialize differently anyway. Might be that, you know, different environments. We often enjoy socializing with other autistic people more, and things like that. But when you're in burnout, you really can just struggle with any social interaction. I know that when I'm sort of in my deepest burnout, I start to feel really guilty at the number of messages on, you know, Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp and the texts and stuff that I'm just not replying to at all, because I just don't have the energy anymore, you know. And it's just taking too much. But then that actually makes it worse, because then I start to feel guilty that I'm not getting back to people, and I'm turning down, you know, invitations to meet up, and I'm ignoring messages and emails and things like that. So you can get into a bit of a cycle with that one as well. And if you're sort of thinking, a lot of this just sounds like depression, you're not alone. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it can really look like depression. It can be very, very sort of similar. And what can happen is that you go along to the GP or something, and they just kind of go, oh yeah, depression, let's get you on some antibiotics. Not antibiotics, sorry, antidepressants. I know that you get prescribed antibiotics for many things, but generally
Not
speaking,
for
not
depression
depression.
usually.
But and the thing is, you know, you can absolutely have depression being autistic. I'm not saying that you can't. But if you're in burnout and it's getting misdiagnosed as depression, then those antidepressants or those techniques that you might use to help with depression, that's not actually going to help. So how do you know the difference? You know, how do you know if it is autistic burnout or whether it's depression? Generally speaking, if you are in autistic burnout, then you're still going to get joy from your special interests. If you're in depression, you know, if you're deep in depression, then chances are, nah, you're just not really interested in them anymore. That's kind of gone. Whereas if you're in burnout, then you still do get some joy from your special interests. You still kind of want to be able to interact with them, and they're still going to help your mental health. So yeah, that's because I know it can be difficult to sort of pick apart which it is, can't it?
Yeah, and I think, you know, they're not mutually exclusive. You can be depressed and experiencing autistic burnout at the same time. So that's why it's so important that, you know, for tackling autistic burnout, that you take those, you know, multiple routes to address it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what is atypical burnout? And huge kudos to Tanya Adkin and David Bray Hammond for the work that they're doing around this. I think they've done absolutely brilliantly with it, and it's really, really well checking out. So at the very end there, we've got a creating autistic suffering, what is atypical burnout link, which you'll get access to, and it's a really, really good article there. They sort of consider, well, what if you can't stop in the cover, right? Because a lot of autistic people, whenever they're in burnout, don't necessarily have the option to carry on doing things. But there's a lot of us who may not realize that we have to stop, and we might not have the ability to stop. Times we might not be able to sense that we're exhausted in the first place, because our sense of what's going on inside our bodies might not allow us to realize that we're absolutely exhausted. So we might keep on going beyond the point of burnout, because we're not in tune with our own bodies. And we're not getting those signals saying, "Oi, Marion, you got to stop now." before you go any further. We might not get that. There might also be financial commitments, or childcare. Like if I have to stop my job because I'm burnt out, I might lose the house because I can't pay the mortgage. And if you've got a small family, if you've got a large family, then you might not be able to do that. So some people might carry on still doing some things because they're in while they're in burnout because of these other commitments, which just means that they're going to get even more burnt out in the long run. They might have ADHD as well, which is really common. Again, a lot of autistics are also ADHDers. And if you've still got, if your ADHD characteristics are making it harder for you to spot that you're burnt out, or if it's meaning that you're having that atypical expression because you're ADHD, it'll be harder to sort of recognize that you're going through burnout in the first place. Masking. I mean, we've spoken quite extensively about masking already, so I'm not going to go into that too much, but sometimes we can be even masking to ourselves how burnt out we are. And I say this as someone who has very, very convincingly masked to themselves about how burnt out they are. Tanya Adkin uses a term called meerkatting to describe what's going on with atypical burnout. And somebody who's going through atypical burnout might be in a really hyper aroused state. So they might be that meerkat who's constantly looking out for danger, highly vigilant, really hyper aroused all of the time. Where's that danger coming from? Got to watch out for that. Yeah, am I masking enough here? Am I not doing enough there? Am I making sure that all of this is done at the same time? How energy is involved in that? Absolutely exhausting all by itself. And then if you're using all of your energy for that, then you don't have that energy for that good quality of life that you need to have. You may be, I mean, we all know that even if we're not in burnout, that you might feel safer with certain people that you can co-regulate with. But if you're in really high burnout, or if you're in atypical burnout, then they might be the only people that you want to be around. And I think co-regulation is so powerful. We do a lot of, you teach children how to co-regulate, but to be honest, adults need support co-regulating a lot of the time too. And even as an adult who has difficulty regulating at times, when I am regulating myself, I'm not just thinking about myself regulating me. I'm remembering the times that other people have reminded me to do these things. So that's still co-regulation in a way, isn't it? So these memories of this person helping with that, and then that helps to co-regulate. Very often, atypical burnout can be misdiagnosed, and we like same as depression. It can be misdiagnosed by an awful lot of things. And one of the things that Tanya and David have sort of explored is whether or not EUPD, so emotionally unstable personality disorder, might be some autistic people who are in burnout, atypical burnout, and it's just not being recognized. Now, that's not to say that everybody who has an EUPD diagnosis should be going off and running and saying, oh, I'm going through burnout instead. Some of you may well be. For some people, it might not be the case. You might have EUPD and be in autistic burnout at the same time. Again, they are not mutually exclusive. But it's worth sort of considering if you've repeatedly had lots of different diagnoses and none of them have really captured what's going on with you, to consider, right, which of these diagnoses are true diagnoses, which of these are misdiagnoses, which of these are only half of the diagnosis, which is the other things that we maybe need to identify that's going on at the same time. And I think if you've got a long trauma past, like a lot of autistic people do, that can be really hard to pick out. And it's so important then that you find a good professional who can work out some of these things. And again, the last thing, that that article, you will all get a copy of the slides. And that article is very worth going through, and definitely worth going out and checking Tanya and David on social media, making sure that you're having more of a read about their work there. I'm so impressed with the stuff that they're doing, talking about it, because when I started reading the things, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so relating to so much of that. And it was so nice getting that validation at the same time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's good to feel seen, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Do you want me to talk to this, or would you like to? I was good.
Yeah, I mean, you can maybe if you talk through it, because I know this is one that you sort of added whilst I was on leave.
Sure, that's what I was thinking I might do. Okay, so Rainmaker Al, Raymaker and others back in 2020 did the first kind of study really into burnout. And they came up with this really interesting diagram. So life stressors like masking, expectations, disability management, life stress changes, can all add to that cumulative load that can make it difficult for us. And there are lots of barriers to support, like gaslighting and dismissal, poor boundaries, poor self-advocacy, can't take a break, and lack of external resources. And all together, that can all contribute to burnout. Now, again, I'm quite aware of time because we have spoken for longer than we usually do during a webinar, and we've got a small number of slides compared to usual as well. But we'll see if we can weave through some of this so then we've got that opportunity to have a chat with some of you. But if we have a think about some of those causes of burnout, I think some of them we've already talked about quite a bit, haven't we? Like masking too much, but so much stress and pressure. I mean, I refer to myself as a recovering perfectionist. I try not to be a perfectionist, but it's so hard, isn't it? It can be very difficult if that's been part of your masking.
And we can hold ourselves up to such a high standard sometimes, even if we would totally recognize that that would be unrealistic for other people. But I'm different. So sort of really always trying to kind of do everything is a big contributing factor. Hitting loads of crisis points as well. If you're having loads of meltdowns, you're having loads of shutdowns, if you're going to work or college or school or something, and then you're coming home and every single night you're hitting a crisis point, that is very likely.
Too much.
It's too much. It's exhausting. That's going to lead to burnout. Your sensory needs not being recognized, not being met, or just being ignored. People know that they're there but refusing to meet them. That can be like a massive contributing factor as well. And I think so many of us just don't realize even what our sensory needs are until we really deep dive and explore them. So we will be doing a webinar on that very kind of coming up quite soon, because we know that that's a really, really big one as well. As is not setting and maintaining boundaries and having other people violate those boundaries, even when we do try and put them in place as well. As I said earlier, kind of a lot of that sort of is around kind of people pleasing as well. It can be, it can all kind of be very much combined together. Big significant changes as well, whether that's something like moving house, or whether that's getting a new job, or whether that's, I don't know, going through menopause or something. There are so many different changes that we might go
Having
through
a
in our life.
baby,
The list
getting
is
a new
just,
pet.
yes. I mean, I recently managed to drop my laptop, and I was very fortunate that my techie husband had a spare ready, but all the stress of changing over to a new laptop, and I didn't get to do my usual gradual change that I normally do, because my old one is just, everything's wibbly and kind of blue and purple, and it doesn't stay still, so it's just unusable. So I just had to go straight onto a new one. Big change, really dysregulating, actually, really unpleasant. So all kinds of different changes. And obviously, of course, trauma, which we are more vulnerable. We are a little bit more likely to be experiencing a whole range of different kinds of trauma as well. But again, a big contributing factor to burnout.
Absolutely. And some of the barriers to support. So ableism from yourself and from outside. I mean, the number of autistic people who come to us for support who will say things like, but I should be able to do that. But everyone else can manage that. But I've managed for 40 years without doing this. Why should I have to do it now? Internalized ableism. And you know what? We get it because we've experienced it ourselves too. And I think undoing that is hard work, and it's a lifelong exercise, I think. But there's also the external ableism. You've never had to have this before. Everybody's a little bit autistic. All these sort of falsehoods that people might perpetuate. The people pleasing and can't say no sort of flick is already covered. But where's your downtime? And I know that as somebody who is a full-time working parent, between work and being a good partner and being a good parent and trying to do all the things, sometimes it's really difficult to sort of where's the downtime? Where is the time that you have to sort of go in with your hobbies? What are the things that I'm doing that helps to give me spoons, that helps to give me energy back again? I felt very proud of myself earlier on today, because I had a 2 hour break in between finishing like part of a training session and going on to do the next part of the training session. And instead of just doing more work, I actually took some time to myself. You know, I went and I played a video game for a little while and ate some same food and watched some Star Trek. And for me, that was me just going and exploring all of those things. I felt guilty as hell doing some of that, because part of my brain, that ableist part of my brain was like, ooh, you should be more productive. Is there not some good parenting stuff that you can do here? You know, are you supporting your family enough when you're doing this? Are you doing the right thing by your work? Yes, actually I am, because I'm looking after myself. It can be really hard to find that downtime. For a lot of autistic people as well, our friends and family networks may not be able to provide support in the way that a lot of non-autistic people would have. So a lot of autistic people have a lot of their support online. So they may not actually be physically in the neighborhood to provide some support. So a lot of autistic people are estranged from family as well. So I think the most recent stats that I've seen say that about 1% of non-autistic people are estranged from family members, but up to 5% of autistic people are estranged from family, which means that you've got fewer opportunities for people out there who can give you some support, who can give you that break, who can take on some of those tasks. And if they are also autistic, which is even more likely because autistic people create autistic people, like to great delight in telling a group of people today that the leading cause of autism is sex, because, you know, autistic people create more autistics. If you come from a long line of autistics, then it's possible that your autistic family members are experiencing burnout too. So they may not have the energy to provide some of that support that may have otherwise been really useful to you. Yeah. But what can we do?
Yes, so don't fear, you know, we never just dump all of the problems on you and then run away. We always like to provide ways to actually help as well. So biggest thing, autistic acceptance. That really does help with burnout. Accepting yourself, you know, accepting your own autistic identity, gaining acceptance from people around you as well. It all plays an absolutely massive part in helping us, you know, helping with our self-identity and that kind of validation, and helping us to have that good self-esteem and things. Exploring and supporting sensory needs as well. So really having a good think about what your actual sensory needs are. And at this point, I should also mention, as we always do, that in our downloadable documents section on our information hub, we do have a sensory profile there. We've got guidance notes, and we've got an example copy as well that's already been filled into so if you're unable to get an occupational therapist to really go through and explore your sensory needs with you and create a sensory diet, you do have that option as well. Revisiting those boundaries, because we've discussed how not having, you know, boundaries respected can really kind of cause and contribute to burnout. So really thinking about, well, what actually are my boundaries? What boundaries do I need to put into place to be really supporting myself and making sure that I am feeling safe? Reducing demands where possible is an absolutely massive one, and that's going to vary from person to person in terms of what that can look like practically and what's going to help you as an individual. You know, it could involve all sorts of different things. It could involve asking for a bit more help from other people for them to kind of take on more. It can sometimes be kind of lowering our standards a little bit, you know. Well, actually, is it going to be the end of the world if I just don't hoover today? You know, if I leave that for tomorrow or next week, is it really going to be the end of the world if we have a microwave meal tonight instead of me cooking from scratch or something like that? So trying to find ways in which you can actually reduce the demands that have been put upon you, whether that's by yourself or by other people, can be really, really great. Thinking about like, so yeah, what do I actually need to do versus what would be quite desirable if I did do it. Cutting down household tasks and things. It's also worth considering places like access to work. which is a Scottish government scheme, which can really help with you in the workplace. They can come in, they can do a workplace needs assessment, they can sort of help sometimes with some of the financial cost of some reasonable adjustments and certain kind of adapted sort of tools and assistive technology and things like that. So they're good to know about as well, and applying to them as soon as you can when you start a job as well, because that can make a difference as to how much that they might pay for, as opposed to how much your employer has to pay for as well. Help with meal prep too can be a big one, can't it? You know, kind of whether or not that's sort of cutting down on what you're doing yourself, whether that's getting somebody else to kind of give you a hand too. I've already seen in the chat that a few people have been mentioning this one, which I'm really pleased about. But if you're in Scotland, then you could try applying for adult disability payments as well, which is the kind of Scottish version of PIP, which you might have known about. And it's a much nicer version as well. It's better to apply to than PIP is, and they do have a
Big
better
support for
understanding.
applying for it as well, from what I've heard too.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good one to know about and to look into as well. If part of the problem at the moment, part of the demands that you have upon you are kind of financially related, that can be a really good one. Reducing your social demands too, you know, just cutting that down, because yeah, it's okay actually to stay at home for a whole weekend if that's what you need. It is okay not to message people back. You know, I talked about how guilty it made me feel, but it shouldn't be making me feel guilty if that's what I need to be doing at that moment in time to kind of help myself out of burnout. It's okay to reduce those social demands if that's something that's actually adding to your burnout, and just practicing saying no. And when we say practice saying no, literally practice in front of the
Stand
mirror.
in front of the mirror.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And actually do it, you know, like watch yourself doing it. Have a think about how you're standing when you're saying it as well, you know. Do it over and over. Practice a few different phrases that you can use, you know, in order to assert those boundaries, in order to make sure that you are actually getting all of your own needs met, and that you're not just falling into the people pleasing.
Don't say sorry. Like if somebody says, "Oh, can you do this?" and you can't, don't say, "No, sorry, I can't. Why are you sorry?" It's like, "Oh, I can't. It's absolutely fine." You don't need to apologize for not being everything to everybody. You really don't. It's an unreasonable expectation. You can stop apologizing for that. You really can. I'm giving you permission to stop apologizing for that here, if anybody needs that. We did a thing in one of our late diagnosis groups where they all said they were finding it really difficult to say no. So I said, right, I want to borrow £500,000 from you. Can I do that? And they're like, no. And they're like, great. So you can say no to people. Brilliant. Let's do some more. Let's practice some more. So that made it a little bit easier. Right. Other things that we can do to tackle autistic burnout. And we might rattle through some of these because they're quite self-evident on here, so that we've got some time to answer. Because I see you've got a lot of questions, which is great. Immersing yourself in specialized interests, or those passionate interests that you've got, can be really, really handy. But as can rediscovering old interests. So if you're going through burnout, you might want to watch the new series of Star Trek, which is really cool. But you might also want to go back to watching an old series, which is going to give you an awful lot of comfort too. If you're a student, going and checking out the student disability services to see if there's anything that they can do there that can help take the pressure off, that can give you some more support. Finding new ways to express yourself. Oh, hang on. Finding new ways to express yourself can be really, really handy too. So if you've got all these feelings, you've got all these things that are going on inside yourself, finding different ways to externalize that can be really, really good. So that could be through some art, through some writing, through some journaling, going out and sort of walking, maybe singing through music. So different ways that you can get those feelings out and start processing them. Become a recovering perfectionist. Now, it is not an end goal by itself. It is a process. And I'm still, as a recovering perfectionist, I fall down that rabbit hole occasionally. I sometimes, some days I fail at being a recovering perfectionist, but that's okay, because I can try again tomorrow. You know, I don't need to be perfect at recovering from perfectionism as well. So it's okay to go back and give yourself a bit of a break from there. Autistic peer support can be so vital for this, because whenever we see other autistic people who have either gone through burnout and come out the other side, or who are still really struggling with it, and you can feel a lot less alone. So definitely lean on your autistic peers if you can. Unmasking where it's safe to do so, which we've already had a look at. Use strategies to support your executive functioning. So again, I think we could probably do an entire webinar on that, or incorporate it. But things like using timers so that you've got things to remind you whenever you need to do the thing. Body doubling is something that we do quite a lot. Very often whenever we're starting a meeting, has everybody been to the toilet? Has everyone got a drink? Halfway through the meeting, will we stop for a tea and a pee break? So using help from other people to support your executive functioning can really help. Learning more about autistic communication and culture can be really useful too, because it can give you then that permission to behave in that authentic autistic kind of way. We did a really good webinar with Sophia Akbar, Scottish ethnic minority autistics, looking at autistic communication and culture. And very, very worth going back and seeing. It's up on our YouTube page too. Finding supportive allies and advocates, so people who are actually going to be out there and help you to get what it is that you need, to make sure that you are looking after yourself, to make sure that you're getting the reasonable adjustments that you are legally entitled to be getting, and helping to take on some of those tasks that maybe you just don't have the spoons for. Self-care, we're going to look at on the next slide, as we've just seen, and then therapy if required. Therapy is hard work. It is genuine hard work. But for those of us who've got a significant trauma background, that doesn't go away by itself. And there's absolutely no shame in going and getting some support with that. There really, really isn't. Right, last couple of slides. I think a lot of these are kind of self-evident as well, Flick, aren't they?
Yeah. We just wanted to give you some examples, because as autistic people, we like getting examples. Just being told, go and practice self-care by itself can be, a bit daunting. But if we give you a good list, then that's really helpful, isn't it? So, things like, journaling can be really good, really helpful for some people to get their kind of thoughts and feelings out. Exercising in a way that works for you. I don't mean that everybody needs to be out jogging. Some autistic people love that. Others are not gonna. I'm not a jogger. I'm a kind of yoga and a bit of dog walking type of person, So find something that works for you and your sensory needs. Same with eating healthily as well. That's not necessarily going to look the same for everyone, because we might have, different sensory needs, different diets and things. But finding a way that you are actually meeting all of your nutritional needs in a week is really important for feeling good. Taking that time to rest, like Marion was saying about earlier, having those regular breaks and things like that. And working on the not feeling guilty when we do take the breaks, so a lot of stuff there that's really kind of self-evident, I think. Like all we would say is like the meditation, for instance. Make sure if you're doing something like that, you're with a trusted professional who knows what they're doing. But lots of really good examples on this page, aren't there?
Yeah. And I do. I mean, you don't want to weaponize your specialized interests, but I had an old water bottle that didn't have anything I was really interested in, didn't use it at all. I got a Grogu water bottle from our good friends at Diversified. Yeah, I use this one, don't I? My DuckTales water bottle, I use that quite a lot. So it's ones that you actually are more likely to engage with. And I love that, reminding yourself how it feels when you've completed that activity as well. It's difficult for me to remember to go and sort of do a weights workout at times, but I really love how I feel afterwards. And then that is a good a good feeling for me to remember. Right. So our key takeaways, just before we go, because there are a ton of questions, we're going to do our absolute best to get through as many as we can, as briefly as we can. But as you've seen, brevity is not our strong point. But masking can be a trauma response. That where possible, we can consider unmasking if you feel safe or comfortable doing so. And finding those places that we can unmask in a way that's safe for us to do so. Not meeting our needs can lead to burnout. Not unmasking at all can lead to burnout as well. And that self-care is not selfish. I think, you know, during COVID lockdowns, we said that so often, I was convinced that it was going to be on my tombstone. But I think, you know, it's good to repeat that again and again. Looking after yourself is not selfish. It's one of the best ways that you can actually look after other people an awful lot of the time. So I will stop the recording for just now. And for those of you who joined us on the recording, thank you so much. And we hope that you've found that really useful.